Sorry I haven't been able to make a video in a while. Been very busy the last couple of weeks. Good stuff going on behind the scenes. It looks like Jagex listened to me and raised prices because I've been talking about how video games are supposed to be more expensive. Well, that's actually kind of clickbait. That's not true. I don't actually believe that this price hike is justified. So for those of you who don't know, I play a lot of old school RuneScape. I lift a lot of weights. Talk about these things a lot on this channel. And in particular, what happened is that very recently, Jagex, the company that makes old school RuneScape, has increased the prices. They've increased the prices a lot, and it's making people unhappy. So to give you a sense of the situation, basically on March 10th, they announced that they are going to be raising the prices of subscription rates for both old school RuneScape and RuneScape 3. And people are not happy because it is a relatively big jump. It is like a 30% jump in some cases. They said essentially that people will be able to be grandfathered into monthly but not other kinds of rates. So they used to have 6-month and yearly rates. They are apparently doing away with the 6-month rate. They're still doing the yearly rate, but the yearly rate they're not grandfathering you is the older rate, while they are supposed to be grandfathering you into the monthly rate, which is bizarre because the monthly rate has always been the worst option, right? If you were paying for the good option, you're not getting to keep your price, it is going up. But if you're paying for the crappy option, you get to keep your old price. Kind of silly. At the same time, also, there's been a lot of hullabaloo on the forums. I see this on Reddit a lot, where people are complaining that actually their grandfathered rates are not being honored, and they're finding that they've been kicked off of their grandfathered rate without real good explanation. Feels really scummy. And most importantly, this is also not the first price hike in a long time. There was a price hike like a couple of years ago, year and a half ago, something like that. And so this is, on top of that hike, and a really big hike. And that means that essentially they've seen membership prices increase by, I think like the number is like 65% over the last few years, which is not good, right? It's a huge jump. I was talking previously about how I think that prices for video games should in general be higher. And the reason for that is that if we are just looking at inflation, video games are now basically half as much as they used to cost. And also at the same time, gamers have been, very resilient to the idea that prices should increase. And also at the same time, the expectation is that video games are bigger, they cost more to make, they have to pay more people, and of course that means that the things get more and more squeezed, and it just makes things more and more difficult. And I talked about how because prices have basically stayed the same since roughly the year 2000, again, that means that the actual cost of a video game has basically been cut in half. Now, here is a situation where I actually don't believe that this is an appropriate price, because when you look at the cost of a RuneScape membership, the cost of your RuneScape membership, I remember very, very well, was like $5 a month when you were a kid, when it was the year 2000 and the game first came out. And that $5 a month price, if we adjusted it for inflation now, again, that would mean that we should be paying roughly $10. At this point, we are paying closer to $15 a month on a monthly rate for the RuneScape membership, which is to say that the cost of a RuneScape membership has increased faster than inflation, and that means that we are probably paying too much. I also want to note a really sort of interesting effect, which is relative pricing to other competitors on the market. So in particular, back in the day, RuneScape was $5 a month, and World of Warcraft was $15 a month, right? So the idea was at the time that RuneScape was this, point-and-click browser MMO, and World of Warcraft was this big, massive, expensive, high-quality thing. And so, of course, you were paying $15 a month for World of Warcraft. But, the fact that you're paying $5 a month for RuneScape, still felt like a good deal because it was a relatively sort of lower budget, not indie, but, sort of a lower budget game, more casual game. And the fact that you're paying $5 a month for it felt appropriate. This is also kind of the same strategy that you see that I've talked about with the gym world, right? So when we talk about the gym world, you have your typical gym will probably run you $30 to $50 a month, something like that. And then you have things like Planet Fitness, which at least when Planet Fitness started out, Planet Fitness sold you memberships at $5 a month. And they were really aiming at this sort of like people who don't go to the gym, people who don't actually go to the gym sort of population. They are aiming at people who don't actually use their membership very much. And so because you're paying $5 a month, the fact that they have to sell like 6 times as many memberships to get the same profit is not a problem, because basically they're expecting that the vast majority of people will say, hey, I'm going to start paying $5 a month. I'm probably going to use the gym a little bit, and then they're basically just going to stop going to the gym. They're going to stop using the membership entirely, but they're not going to cancel it because it's such a small monthly charge, and they're just like, oh yeah, you know, $5 a month, that's nothing. You know, maybe I will make use of it. Maybe I will actually go back to the gym at some point. And so they end up keeping their memberships for very, very long periods of time, even when they're not actually using them, simply because the cost is so low and it's such a low price, right? And then also at the same time, there are other factors, like the fact that RuneScape basically makes you pay per character. So each character that you pay for is another $5. Whereas in a game like World of Warcraft, you pay, you know, $15 a month. Obviously a bit different now. You pay $15 a month and you get basically as many characters as you want. Of course, RuneScape is a slightly different game. World of Warcraft is designed around classes, and so you're really encouraged to play a bunch of different characters so you can try out all the classes, see how they all feel. Whereas RuneScape is more of a game where you just have one character that can kind of do everything, and you just kind of keep doing more stuff over time. Of course, there are different kinds of accounts now. There are things like Iron Man and hardcore characters, and so there are reasons to have multiple accounts and to pay multiple memberships. And so at the same time, again, it makes sense if the cost is low. If you're paying $5 a month and it's like, okay, well, maybe I want to pay for 3 different characters, and that's $15 a month. But, you know, I'm getting a lot of value out of it because I'm playing different characters, or, you know, what have you. Once you start increasing the price of RuneScape so that it is comparable to the price of World of Warcraft, things start to get weird. Because at that point, basically people are going to start reconsidering their options. They're going to say, why am I paying $15 a month for a point-and-click browser game that doesn't have great graphics? You know, that's not the exact, that's not the exact mentality that every single person is going to have. But it makes people actually think about canceling as opposed to just saying, oh yeah, I'll just keep paying $5 a month for forever because, you know, why not? It's a pretty low rate and maybe I'll get some use out of it sometimes. Once it becomes a serious, significant monthly cost, then you start thinking about it like your Netflix. You start thinking about it like your World of Warcraft. You start thinking about it as a monthly cost that maybe you want to pay and maybe you don't, and you become much more aggressive about, you know, sort of deciding whether that value is worth it for you and whether or not you should cancel. Another note is that this comes right on the heels of Jagex having removed most microtransactions from RuneScape 3. So for those of you who aren't aware, old school RuneScape and RuneScape 3 are now basically 2 different versions of the game that have gone in 2 different directions. And RuneScape 3 is the version that has a lot more microtransactions, has a lot more options for players to spend money, in addition to their monthly subscription to the game. So there's been this long-running joke in the community, hey, you know, we make fun of RuneScape 3 because a lot of people think that it's a worse game. We make fun of the fact that you can just buy your way through a lot of the achievements in the game, and, you know, that doesn't feel as serious or you know, proper of a game. But RuneScape 3 was kind of shielding old school RuneScape. The fact that players who were playing RuneScape 3 were paying more money, were willing to pay for microtransactions, meant that they were making a lot of money off of those players, and that profit was shielding them from needing to more aggressively monetize old school RuneScape, which just has the 1 subscription payment per month. That's all you pay, and that's all you do. So they, you know, players voted to remove microtransactions as a part of the game health of RuneScape 3. So of course they removed microtransactions. I don't really know the exact numbers in terms of how much that contributed to Jagex's yearly profit, but basically Jagex has 2 different ways to make money. They had subscriptions and they had microtransactions only in RuneScape 3. When you remove the microtransactions, and it's, from what I've heard, roughly say like 20% of their income, you can't do that as a business. You genuinely cannot just say, hey, you know what? I know it's better for the game and it's better for the health of the game and the players, but I'm going to just sacrifice 20% of our revenue permanently on an ongoing basis for, you know, forever going forwards. And that's just not a thing you can do. Doesn't make investors happy, doesn't make owners happy, you know, doesn't make anybody happy, doesn't make employees happy. And so at the end of the day, when you are willing to take such a huge cut, when you're willing to say, hey, we're going to cut out something that makes so much money for us, then you have to offset it somehow. So I understand the business decision that they've made here. I understand what they had to do, which is, hey, we don't have this one source of revenue coming in anymore. We have to raise the cost elsewhere in order to offset it. And the end result is that Everyone's paying a bit more for their memberships, and that sucks. That is not fun, because it feels like, when you're an old school RuneScape player, like you are having taxation without representation. Like you're having your costs raised and you didn't have a say in it because it had to do with a different game that you weren't paying for. That sucks. That's not fun. At the end of the day, however, I've seen a lot of people being very weird about this, in the sense that, you know, they're basically saying like, hey, I don't think you're putting out enough content for it to be worth, you know, close to $15 a month. I don't think that, you know, what you've added in the past year is worth $15 a month. And that is fundamentally the wrong way to think about it. The right way to think about it is there's a business. The business has to keep its lights on. In order to do so, it has to keep making roughly the same amount of profit or a bit more every year, or else things start getting crunched. And what you are paying for with $15 a month is for the game to keep existing. Like, it's not, you know, you don't pay $15 a month and you get the same game forever, or you pay $15 a month and you get extra stuff. No, like, you're functionally paying for the game to keep existing and for it to keep having some kind of updates in the future, but you're not necessarily like paying for a specific update that you would like. You are just paying for the game to keep existing. If you don't keep paying $15 a month, or whatever cost, and enough people decide that they're not going to keep paying $15 a month, sooner or later Jagex goes out of business, the game stops happening. That's just all there is to it. It is functionally a live service product, which means that it needs to keep making money in order to keep the lights on. Once it's not doing that, it's not going to exist. So what you are functionally paying for is for the game to keep existing. And if you want to keep playing the game as is, and you ostensibly want to have things happen in the future as well, you basically have to keep paying. And that is what it is. And it sucks, again, but that is the nature of the situation. I'm not going to be contrarian and say, hey, you know, these price hikes are justified. Hey, you know, it should be increasing more than inflation, etc. No, I don't think so. I think the prices were probably right, roughly right, the way they were before this price change. Am I going to keep paying it? Am I going to keep playing? Yes, I really like the game. It means a lot to me. It doesn't matter that the price is increasing to me personally. But it's not a popular choice. And it's not something that I think that you should blame any particular employee for. Like, at the end of the day, the people who make this decision, it's not individual employees. It's like C-suite executives, high-level directors, and, you know, functionally shareholders, you know, the people who own the company, who put pressure on it from above, right? And so, frankly, I don't think there's, you know, much value in complaining about it. I don't think there's much value in taking it out on the employees and the people who work on the game. That just is what it is. So that's it for today's video. As always, don't hesitate to like, comment, subscribe, smash the notification bell down below. Let me know what you'd like to see in future videos. Have a good one. I'll talk to you next time.